the discovery of the truth. It's a search for the truth, not a search for doubt. Because if it was a search for doubt, somebody can always find a reason to doubt something, if that's what their goal is. When you came into court on Monday and were sworn into this jury panel to be jurors in this case, you took an oath. You either affirmed or you swore to it. And if you swore to it, you swore to your God that you would fairly and truly try this case and reach a true verdict as you find it to be. And when we look for the truth in this case, and when we approach this evidence from that standpoint, what we find is the following. Back on May 4 of 2021, Varshan Brown was dealing drugs here in Camden County, Georgia. He's a drug dealer. He had cars and people come to the house in early morning hours, staying for brief periods of time and leaving. He had cocaine in his house on that day, 136.695 grams of cocaine in brick form, hard, worth over $13,000. He had a safe in his house, and in that safe, he had additional white substances in a circular form. Sometimes people refer to that as a cookie. There were surveillance cameras in the house that had not been connected yet. And there's photographs of those in there. You've got a box of one that's got like 4 or 5 cameras in it that haven't been connected yet. When you look at photographs of the front porch and the upper eaves, just underneath the fascia board of the front porch, you've got 2 items in both corners. Cylinders with, if you look real closely at those. He had something set up at his house to make him aware if somebody was approaching, because when the officers went up there that day, they saw a red flash. And by seeing what they saw that day, they know we're coming. And he did. Varshan Brown knew they were coming. Just like he told Stephen Murdoch, I knew you were coming, I was waiting on you. And even though the other paramedic in the ambulance did not hear that or does not recall that, the fact remains that the evidence in this case shows that Varshan Brown knew they were coming and he was waiting on them. Because we know what actually happened in this case. We know that Varshan Brown was standing in the bedroom with a loaded .45 Glock pistol. Ready, waiting. Judge, this has already been cleared by the deputies in this particular case. There are no live rounds anywhere in the vicinity. That, in fact, the clerk has possession of any live rounds. He was in possession of a .45 caliber Glock handgun. Either on May 4 or sometime prior to May 4 of 2021, he had taken an extended magazine that can contain up to 24 rounds, 25 cartridges, 25 rounds. And he had taken that magazine and he had put it in the Glock 45. The magazine is clear as well, Your Honor. And he had let the slide go home. And when you let the slide go home, that puts a bullet in the chamber. So sometimes prior to the police making entry into the residence here in Woodbine on May 4, 2021, this gun had been loaded, magazine had been loaded with the number of rounds that were in there. That magazine had been placed in this handgun, and either the slide had gone home, or if he put the magazine in with not the slide back, he had wrapped the slide, the chamber around. Varshan Brown had done actions prior to the police getting there so that he was ready to shoot. was standing in that bedroom with this loaded 45 Glock handgun. Locked and loaded, one in the chamber. However many rounds in the magazine, I don't recall exactly, that were still in there. We know he pulled that trigger. He aimed it, and he pulled that trigger. Not once, not twice, but at least 5 times. And we know that based upon the number of projectiles that were found and the number of shell casings that were found in this particular case. And we know that on the first or second shot, that one of those rounds struck this ballistic shield. And even though it's hard to see in the photographs, you can feel it on the shield where there's an indentation left in the shield. So we know at least one of those rounds, the first or second round, struck this ballistic shield and did not penetrate the shield, was deflected in some way, and lo and behold, in the living room at placard 2, look at the photographs, just outside the bedroom door, we have a 45 caliber projectile. Excuse me. That has been deformed by striking the ballistic shield. Varshan Brown had a loaded gun with malice in his heart and evil intent. He meant to kill cops. And how do we know that? Because he shot 5 times. And we know that those rounds went into the living room area. We know 2 of the projectiles went into the couch directly across. 1 went into the wall. This projectile was there in front of the bedroom door, just out in the living room area. And some of the bullets he fired went through the wall, kicking up dust, went through the television. And he knew they were the police. He knew it. The evidence shows that he knew it. Because as a judge will charge you, you can determine what someone's knowledge is by all the facts and circumstances that was in existence at that particular time. Sheriff's Office, search warrant. No response. What were the police to do? Stand out there for 5 minutes, waiting for somebody to come to the door, or the possibility that somebody would come to the door? They had information that this drug dealer had weapons in the house, and as it turned out, he did. And not only did he have weapons, he intended to use them. If somebody's willing to shoot at a cop, they're willing to shoot at anybody. That's who Varshan Brown is. Now, much has been made in this case, and we also know that he knew they were police because Chris Downey, the first officer in, was carrying this ballistic shield with these large white letters across, sheriff. And as they come in, they don't come in guns blazing. They're not looking to shoot anybody. They don't want to have to do that. They say, get down, get down. But Varshan Brown does not get down. Because he's standing there with a loaded 45 caliber Glock handgun in his hand. Now, the police did not know Latoya James was there. And much has been made about that. But Varshan Brown did. And Varshan Brown knew that she was standing right beside him when he decided and chose not to drop the gun, not to raise his hands, not to get down, not to comply. Instead of doing that, with him knowing Latoya James, his cousin, who he evidently doesn't care much about, because he's the one that put her in harm's way. Because he's the one to begin to take violent action toward the police, knowing that she's right beside him. And anybody on the face of God's green earth knows that if somebody shoots at the police, they're going to shoot back. Shouldn't be a real surprise. Yet he still, knowing that his cousin is standing beside him, and that's the police coming in the house, he decides to not comply, to not give up, to not just say, okay, you got me. He decided to raise that handgun, whether it was in his right hand, his left hand, at some point in both hands, doesn't really matter, because the evidence clearly shows that he had a gun in his hand. And the evidence clearly shows that he fired that gun. And the evidence clearly shows that he fired that gun at the police. 5 times. He put Latoya James in harm's way. He's responsible for that. His decision, his actions, nobody else's. If he had never fired a shot, there would have been no shots fired. He's responsible for everything that happened after that. And so when we're looking for the truth in this particular case and looking at the evidence, and there's differences in people's recollections, just as the gentleman that was seated up here in the back way of the bar right during jury selection talked about situations where he'd been in firefights in Iraq, and going back after the fact, talking to his fellow Marines about that particular situation. They had differing recollections, but that didn't cause them to think they were lying. It's just the nature of the situation and the high-stress situation that occurs. You have different recollections of that event. You do in this case as well to some extent, but nobody's lying. They remember it as best they can from what actually happened that night. And nobody got together to try to get any stories together. Because if they had, they sure didn't do a good job of it, did they? Because all would be identical, wouldn't they? But they're not. Because they're going by their own recollection. And that's where you find the truth. People telling what they recall as best they can, and finding where that testimony intersects, when it matches up, when it meshes. That's where the truth is found in this particular case. Varshan